Now to the man who, to many, is the Justice Minister in waiting, David Ford, leader of the Alliance Party. Thank you for joining us. Is Stormont ready for devolving policing and justice?
I think that's the big question for this week, but certainly I think I'm here as the leader of a party that's very concerned to see that devolution of justice happens and happens properly with the proper policies, and who spent the last year saying that policies are much more important than personalities.
And what about timing?
I think there is now a degree of problem because of what Mark Devonport was talking about earlier. There are clearly at the moment very poor relations between the DUP and Sinn Féin. There is clearly an imperative on the part of Sinn Féin to see justice devolved, yet we've seen on the other side Peter Robinson effectively handing a veto to Reg MP in circumstances where Reg MP seems to be using the same kind of language as Nigel Dodds used a few years ago, about 10 years, 15 years, whatever. I think there is a need to see what you've just described as the last piece of the jigsaw in place. But I think it's also absolutely vital that we don't see something as important as justice ending up in the same difficulties as something as important as education, and that we have a degree of agreement and understanding before there's any question of devolution.
So you think, and you presumably agree with Peter Robinson, that the system needs change. It's been a long-held position of Alliance that you don't like.
Yeah, I think the accuracy is Peter Robinson now agrees with the Alliance Party. But the difference is that when Alliance talks about a weighted majority government, it's to get better governance. The problem is when any unionists say it, Sinn Féin, quite understandably, given the current debacle, believes it's a mechanism to exclude them. It's certainly not on our part, but it is the long-term direction in which we see travel being necessary.
Well, is it something then that should happen before policing and justice is devolved?
No, clearly there's absolutely no prospect of changing away from the current rigid d'Hondt mechanism, power sharing, implemented since Good Friday, until nationalism is persuaded that it's not an attempt to exclude nationalism. Now, it certainly isn't when Alliance talk about it, but I can understand why nationalists think it is when unionists talk about it that way.
But they don't see it when you say it. I mean, perhaps they view the Alliance Party as a unionism with a small u.
I suspect there are some elements in Sinn Féin accept our bona fides when we talk about getting better governance, and there are others who clearly regard any such suggestion by anybody as being a major problem.
Do you also agree with Peter Robinson that the post of Justice Minister will be a relatively minor one?
Well, I think it's entirely necessary for the First Minister to suggest that that's the case. I think if you look at what was being talked about a year or so ago, we would talk about the prospect that there would be a Justice Minister who would run errands on behalf of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, probably wouldn't even attend meetings of the Executive, never mind be a part of it. That clearly is not now the position on the legislation passed at Westminster in March. So there clearly are changes being made. But I certainly agree that the sort of issue that we saw raising all kinds of problems in the 1960s and early 1970s of attempted political direction of the police is over and must be over. I don't want to see any politician countermanding the Chief Constable on operational issues.
So is Alliance lining up for the job?
Alliance is not lining up for the job. Alliance is lining up to get devolution in good prospects, because there are clearly a range of policies which must be put in place. There's legislative reform needed, there's administrative reform needed. Some of them were covered in your package earlier. And there's absolutely no point in having devolution unless those can be agreed. And I think if we look at the prospect of just slotting a minister into place wherever they might come from without getting those points agreed, we would run into a major debacle, and I don't think justice can stand that. I think it's absolutely vital that parties engage in talks, and I'm quite willing to engage in talks with anybody who wants to talk to me, and they should be talking to each other as well, as to the kind of policies that need to be implemented under devolution.
OK.